3 versions of Judas. There seemed a certainty in degradation. T. E. Lawrence, The 7 Pillars of Wisdom, 103. In Asia Minor, or in Alexandria, in the 2nd century of our faith, in the days when Basilides proclaimed that the cosmos was a reckless or maleficent improvisation by angels lacking in perfection, Niels Runeberg, with singular intellectual passion, would have led one of the Gnostic conventicles. Dante might have consigned him to a sepulchre of fire. His name would have helped swell the catalogue of minor heresiarchs between Saturnillus and Carpocrates. One or another fragment of his teachings, bedizened with invective, would have been recorded for posterity in the apocryphal Liber Adversus Omnes Haresus, or would have perished when the burning of a monastery's library devoured the last copy of the Syntagma. Instead, God allotted him the 20th century and the university city of Lund. There, in 1904, he published the first edition of Christus och Judas. There, in 1909, his magnum opus, Den Himmlische Waldsaren. Of this last-named book there is a German version, translated in 1912 by Emil Schering. It is titled Der heimliche Heiland. Before undertaking an examination of the works mentioned above, it is important to reiterate that Niels Runeberg, a member of the National Evangelical Union, was a deeply religious man. At a soirée in Paris, or even in Buenos Aires, a man of letters might very well rediscover Runeberg's theses. Those theses, proposed at such a soirée, would be slight and pointless exercises in slovenliness or blasphemy. For Runeberg, they were the key that unlocked one of theology's central mysteries. They were the stuff of study and meditation, of historical and philological controversy, of arrogance, of exaltation, and of terror. They justified and destroyed his life. Those who peruse this article should likewise consider that it records only Runeberg's conclusions, not his dialectic or his proofs. It will be said that the conclusion no doubt preceded its proofs. But what man can content himself with seeking out proofs for a thing not even he himself believes in, or whose teaching he cares not for? The first edition of Christus och Judas bears this categorical epigraph, whose meaning, years afterward, Niels Runeberg himself was monstrously to expatiate upon. It is not one thing, but all the things which legend attributes to Judas Iscariot that are false. De Quincey, 1857. Like a certain German before him, De Quincey speculated that Judas had delivered up Christ in order to force him to declare his divinity and set in motion a vast uprising against Rome's yoke. Runeberg suggests a vindication of a metaphysical nature. Cleverly, he begins by emphasizing how superfluous Judas's action was. He observes, as Robertson had, that in order to identify a teacher who preached every day in the synagogue and worked miracles in the plain sight of thousands of people, there was no need of betrayal by one of the teacher's own apostles. That is precisely, however, what occurred. To assume an error in the scriptures is intolerable, but it is no less intolerable to assume that a random act intruded into the most precious event in the history of the world. Ergo, Judas's betrayal was not a random act, but predetermined, with its own mysterious place in the economy of redemption. Runeberg continues, the Word, when it was made flesh, passed from omnipresence into space, from eternity into history, from unlimited joy and happiness into mutability and death. To repay that sacrifice, it was needful that a man, in representation of all mankind, make a sacrifice of equal worth. Judas Iscariot was that man. Alone among the apostles, Judas sensed Jesus' secret divinity and his terrible purpose. The Word had stooped to become mortal. Judas, a disciple of the Word, would stoop to become an informer, the most heinous crime that infamy will bear, and to dwell amid inextinguishable flames. As below, so above. The forms of earth correspond to the forms of heaven. The blotches of the skin are a map of the incorruptible constellations. Judas is, somehow, a reflection of Jesus. From that conclusion derive the 30 pieces of silver and the kiss. From that conclusion derives the voluntary death, so as even more emphatically to merit reprobation. Thus did Niels Runeberg explain the enigma that is Judas. Theologians of every faith brought forth refutations. Lars Peter Engström accused Runeberg of ignoring the hypostatic union. Axel Borelius of rekindling the Docetic heresy, which denied Jesus' humanity. The steely Bishop of Lund accused him of contradicting chapter 22, verse 3 of the Gospel according to St. Luke. These diverse anathemas did have their influence on Runeberg, who partially rewrote the reprehended book and modified its doctrine. He abandoned the theological ground to his adversaries and proposed oblique arguments of a moral order. He admitted that Jesus, who could call upon the considerable resources that omnipotence can offer, had no need of a man to carry out his plan for the redemption of all mankind. Then he rebutted those who claimed that we know nothing of the inexplicable betrayer. We know, Runeberg said, that he was one of the apostles, one of those chosen to herald the kingdom of heaven, to heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, and cast out demons. Matthew 10, 7-8. Luke 9:1. The acts of a man thus singled out by the Redeemer merit the most sympathetic interpretation we can give them. To impute his crime to greed, as some have done, citing John 12:6, is to settle for the basest motive. Niels Runeberg proposed a motive at the opposite extreme, a hyperbolic, even limitless asceticism. The ascetic, ad majorem Dei gloriam, debases and mortifies the flesh. Judas debased and mortified the spirit. He renounced honor, goodness, peace, the kingdom of heaven, as others, less heroically, renounce pleasure. Note: Borelius sarcastically asks, why did he not renounce renunciation? Why not renounce the renunciation of renunciation? He plotted his sins with terrible lucidity. In adultery, tenderness and abnegation often play a role. In homicide, courage. In blasphemy and profanation, a certain satanic zeal. Judas chose sins unvisited by any virtue. Abuse of confidence, John 12:6, and betrayal. He labored with titanic humility. He believed himself unworthy of being good. Paul wrote, "He that glorieth, let him glory in the Lord." 1 Corinthians 1:31. Judas sought hell because joy in the Lord was enough for him. He thought that happiness, like goodness, is a divine attribute, which should not be usurped by men. Note: in a book unknown to Runeberg, Euclides da Cunha notes that in the view of the Canudos heresiarch Antonio Consigliero, virtue is a near impiety. The Argentine reader will recall analogous passages in the work of the poet Almafuerte. In the symbolist journal Siu Insegel, Runeberg published an assiduous descriptive poem titled The Secret Lake. The first verses narrate the events of a tumultuous day, while the last record the discovery of a glacial tarn. The poet suggests that the eternity of those silent waters puts right our useless violence and somehow both allows it and absolves it. The poem ends with these words: "The water of the forest is happy. We can be evil and in pain." Many have discovered, after the fact, that in Runeberg's justifiable beginnings lies his extravagant end, and that Den Himmlische Falsaren is a mere perversion or exasperation of his Christus och Judas. In late 1907, Runeberg completed and revised the manuscript text. Almost 2 years passed before he delivered it to the publisher. In October 1909, the book appeared with a foreword, lukewarm to the point of being enigmatic, by the Danish Hebrew scholar Erik Erfjord, and with the following epigraph: "He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not." John 1:10. The book's general argument is not complex, although its conclusion is monstrous. God, argues Niels Runeberg, stooped to become a man for the redemption of the human race. We might well then presume that the sacrifice effected by him was perfect, not invalidated or attenuated by omissions. To limit his suffering to the agony of one afternoon on the cross is blasphemous. Note: Maurice Abramowitz observes, Jesus, according to these Scandinavians, always has the best part. Its setbacks, thanks to the science of typographers, enjoy a polyglot reputation. His residence of 33 years among humans was, in short, only a vacation. In Appendix 3 to his Christliga Dogmatic, Erfield rebuts this passage. He notes that the crucifixion of God has not ended, because that which happened once in time is repeated endlessly in eternity. Judas now continues to hold out his hand for the silver, continues to kiss Jesus' cheek, continues to scatter the pieces of silver in the temple, continues to knot the noose on the field of blood. In order to justify this statement, Erfield cites the last chapter of the first volume of Jaromir Hladek's Vindication of Eternity. To claim that he was man, and yet was incapable of sin, is to fall into contradiction. The attributes impeccabilitas and humanitas are incompatible. Chemnitz will allow that the Redeemer could feel weariness, cold, distress, hunger, and thirst. One might also allow him to be able to sin and be condemned to damnation. For many, the famous words in Isaiah 53, 2-3, he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness. And when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected of men. A man of sorrows and acquainted with grief are a foreshadowing of the crucified Christ at the hour of his death. For some, Hans Lassen Martensen, for example, they are a refutation of the loveliness that the vulgar consensus attributes to Christ. For Runeberg, they are the detailed prophecy not of a moment but of the entire horrendous future, in time and in eternity, of the Word made flesh. God was made totally man, but man to the point of iniquity, man to the point of reprobation and the abyss. In order to save us, he could have chosen any of the lives that weave the confused web of history. He could have been Alexander, or Pythagoras, or Rurik, or Jesus. He chose an abject existence. He was Judas. In vain did the bookstores of Stockholm and Lund offer readers this revelation. The incredulous considered it, a priori, a vapid and tedious theological game. Theologians disdained it. Runeberg sensed in that ecumenical indifference an almost miraculous confirmation. God had ordered that indifference. God did not want his terrible secret spread throughout the earth. Runeberg realized that the hour was not yet come. He felt that ancient, divine curses were met in him. He recalled Elijah and Moses, who covered their faces upon the mountain so as not to look upon God. Isaiah, who was terrified when his eyes beheld the one whose glory fills the earth. Saul, whose eyes were blinded on the road to Damascus. The rabbi Simeon ben Azai, who saw the garden and died. The famous wizard John of Viterbo, who went mad when the Trinity was revealed to him. The Midrashim, who abominate those who speak the Shem HaMephorash, the secret name of God. Was it not that dark sin that he, Runeberg, was guilty of? Might not that be the blasphemy against the Holy Ghost? Matthew 12:31, which shall not be forgiven. Valerius Soranus died for revealing the hidden name of Rome. What infinite punishment would be Runeberg's for having discovered and revealed the terrible name of God? Drunk with sleeplessness and his dizzying dialectic, Niels Runeberg wandered the streets of Malmö, crying out for a blessing, that he be allowed to share the inferno with the Redeemer. He died of a ruptured aneurysm on March 1st, 1912. Heresiologists will, perhaps, remember him. He added to the concept of the sun, which might have been thought well spent, the complexities of misery and evil.